And good morning, everybody. And again, thank you for joining in today's week, as we just mentioned, week 199 of this study in the Gospel of John. I did some projections on where we'll end up and, guessing at what number. But I can't remember what it is. I think we'll be done though before 300. So anyway, here we go. Last time we, in preparation, we're talking about Jesus is preparing his disciples for what they will experience in the days to come. And last week, he makes a dramatic shift in his conversation. The entirety of what he's been talking about in chapters 14 and 15 would, in a very generalized sense, focus on this subject of love and the importance of love. He will be moving back to that, but he turns to this opposing subject of hate. And what he's talking about, hate, is preparing the disciples because they will be on the receiving end of hate. One very obvious truth, but it came to my mind in a light bulb this last week as I was thinking about this. Jesus speaks very clearly about hate, but the disciples, this is so obvious but it came to me. But the disciples are never instructed to return hate with hate. Boy, that's something to think about. He expressed that they too will be hated by some. It's not all, but by some. We made an attempt to define who those people are, primarily those in power, those who perceive that they have something to lose through Jesus. And this is our diagram. And Dave and Sterling, I don't think either of you were here last week, but we'll talk more about this. But the circle down below is that if they hated Jesus, saying, if they hated me, they will hate you. And I won't go into time of talking about this illustration, but what is true of Jesus is true of the followers of Jesus, and only because it is true of Jesus. We then discussed hate at a more generalized scope as we perceive it in our world. Our world is filled with hate today, and that's an understatement. More so than any time I can recollect in my mind, as far as hate leading to an ununified belief. And then that's certainly part of our world today, both within and without the church. In verse 15, 20 through 25, we continue with this, and he's going to be commenting more on the idea of hate. Could somebody read that from either the screen, or assuming you have the screen, or from your text in the Bible? Either one. Could somebody read that? Morning, Carl.
Morning.
Remember what I told? Oh, go ahead.
Remember the word that I said to you, a slave is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. But all these things they will do to you for my name's sake, because they do not know the one who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have sinned, but now they have no excuse for their sin. He who hates me hates the Father also. If I had not done among them the works which no one else did, they would not have sinned. But now they have both seen and hated me and my Father as well. But they have done this to fulfill the word that is written in their law. They hate me without a cause.
Thanks, Carl.
Yes.
All righty, let's move on here and take a look at this verse by verse, verse 20. I've got two slides coming up here. First of all, why the coming persecution? Jesus is moving from hate. Now he's attaching the word persecution to hate. You know, that's an outcome. Remember the word that I said to you, a slave is not greater than his master. He did say that. And of course, he augmented that in a few weeks back, saying that I no longer call you slaves, but call you friends. But here he's reverting back to that master-slave relationship to make a point. And he says, if they persecuted me, the master, they will also persecute you, the slave or the follower. If they kept my words, conversely, if they keep my words, they will keep yours also. Both are true. However, his emphasis is on the persecution aspect. Now, here's our model from last week. We've already looked at it. And with this idea of Jesus and follower both receiving this persecution, there are two responses within this one relationship. Now, I just want you to know how I am thinking about this, and it's up to you whether you buy this or not. But the way what I'm going to briefly explain, and I think I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, is just how I view, we could call it the kingdom, the reality of God, virtually everything that exists. And it's got some fine nuances, primarily in how we understand the words of Jesus. That's what's driving me. I'm not coming up with an idea. This isn't my graphics are my own, but not the idea. We tend to think of the people here. We think in terms, as human thinking is white hat, black hat. Those guys who are the good guys and those guys who are the bad guys. Those who are in, those who are out. That is common human thinking. Virtually every denomination of faith has some level of this kind of thinking. We are not removed from this kind of thinking. I don't really see it quite like that, reality quite like that. I think it is one relationship. And within that one, and what is not whether you choose to be in or out. We're in the relationship because we exist. It's through physical birth. If you and I can fog a mirror, we are in the relationship. And within that relationship, there are multifaceted responses. So that may not mean a whole lot to you right now, but that's what this grid is all about. And it really helps me understand how Jesus talks about the Father, the reality of what he calls in Matthew the kingdom, and our opportunity as human beings. So I'm teaching it in that manner. There are two responses within the one relationship, which is depicted by this grid that exists over all that exists is part of this relationship because it's all created by God. Within one response is persecution, and that response is fueled by hate. That's the subject at hand, and that is being demonstrated primarily by those people in power. Those are the people that hated Jesus, primarily the religious people in power, and then secondarily, the political people in power. I think way far second. But those people who were in the religious know and had in their minds something to lose through the person of Jesus, those are the ones that hated him. And that persecution is fueled by hate. The other response that we see right here in the text is keeping. Those are two diametrically opposed responses, and this is not stated in the text, but I will assume that if we keep his words, we love him. I mean, it's stated numerous times within the Gospels. We keep, it's fueled by love. So we have responses fueled by love, responses fueled by hate. We go to verse 21, but all these things they will do for you. Now he's focusing on the persecution piece. All these things they will do to you for my name's sake, because they do not know the one who sent me. He's giving a reason here why the persecution exists. And here is this grouping right up here. These people are the ones who hate. Here, Jesus points out that the reason for the coming hate is because of a lack of knowing, quote, the one who sent me, the Father. They don't know the Father, these people. That's why they hate, and because they hate, they persecute. And the reason they don't know, this is me, is because of a refusal to let go of how they think. They think that if they think differently through adhering to the words of Jesus, they're going to lose something. They have a level of comfort, power, authority, hearing, whatever you want to call that, that they don't want to give up. It's too much to give up. And that's, in my opinion, why they are hated by this sector of society. Why Jesus is hated, and why they will be hated, the disciples. Thus, here we go. Persecution is fueled by hate, and that's what we've been talking about. His supportive reasoning is in verse 22 through 24. Here I took the liberty, this isn't inspired markings, but I underlined the word spoke and works because I see a correlation. It's those two words together speak of the entirety of Jesus's presence. His words, he's hated because of his words, and he's hated because of his works, his actions, words spoken and works. So I've started to build my thinking on this text around these two ideas. He's talking about these two in the sense of an entirety. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have sin. Well, that makes sense. But now they have no excuse for their sin. We'll talk about sin a little bit today, and then in the next week, how I view what sin is. He who hates me hates my Father. He's making a fact. So now his words are prompting conflict within their being, and that conflict is what he labels as sin. We'll talk about it. Verse 24, if I had not done among them the works. Now, just like verse 22, now he's talking about his actions. If I hadn't done the works which no one else did, they would not have sinned. Same outcome. But now they have both seen, and they have hated me and my Father as well. It's one packaged unity. If they hate me, Jesus said, they will hate my Father, because they hate what is actually true. And we're going to go there. Their hate is not directed to individual personalities. It's a hate directed to what they can't get, to what they can't understand, to what they can't fit into how they need it to fit. That's why they hate. Jesus is saying that it is his presence, his entire presence, through his words and his actions, which is creating the conflict within those who hate. Their sirens are going off, and it can be illustrated like this. This conflict is what he is calling sin. They view themselves at a higher status. They view Jesus at a lower status, but his words and actions are causing an inner conflict within them that they don't like. He is having effect, as the disciples will have an effect, and it's because they view his presence as one who will take away. The conflict is what he labels as sin, and it is sin because how they think is out. Now, this is kind of an introduction to how I think about sin. How they think is out of alignment with what actually exists. The grid represents what actually exists. And though those in power, those who hate, refuse to accept that. They want their own reality. They want it the way they want it. And that delta that we see here with the word conflict, that delta is sin. Remember you've heard this in Sunday School 101. Sin comes from, I don't know if this is true, but sin comes from the original idea of missing the mark, like a archer missing the bullseye. Well, let's assume that is true to some degree, can give us, it's speaking in metaphor, but let's say that helps us understand. Well, that's true. There is a bullseye, and Jesus is operating from and representing that bullseye of existence. Those on the outside of that are in sin because they refuse to accept the bullseye, and because of inner conflict. They just don't want to go there. And it's what is true and what is not true. Verse 25. So this is like a summary verse, and we're going to interpret verse 25 in this very light. But they have done this. The they are not everyone. It's those who hate. They have done this to fulfill the word that is written in their law. I think it's interesting when Jesus speaks of the law, he talks about their law, their way of interpreting the law, their law. And the quote, of which, I never looked this up. I don't know where this is. Jesus is stating it's a quote, but I didn't even think about going there. They hated me without a cause. It sounds like something from Psalms, but I don't know. Thus, okay, we're going to look at this first. What in the world are they saying here? They hated me without a cause. We're going to think about it like this. Okay, here's some facts. Number one, people like you and me, people, we tend to reject, we fight, we snarl at, and we downright hate what we don't understand. I'll take this one to the bank. If we don't understand it, we tend to move into the negative, which leads to hate. Number two, and what is not understood is that which we don't understand it because we can't make it force fit into an existing framework of thinking. In my head, I have a square hole, and I can't figure out how to get that round peg into that square hole. And I will do everything I can because it's got to fit, because it's a square hole. I mean, hey, how could it be anything else? Well, it can. And this is where the disconnect is taking place from my perspective. And what creates hate is when I can't make a detail fit with something that I think is the way it is. We're going to get to the dynamic here in a minute. Now, this is a really enigmatic statement, but I'm going to illustrate it. So bear with me. It's got this word substance and possibility. What on earth do I mean? I'll explain it. To hate without a cause means that I make a movement to what I'm calling substance. Bear with me. I don't mean to be cute or enigmatic. I move in my head, I move to what I'm calling substance, let's call it reality, based solely on possibility. Okay, go, what is he talking about? Which I create in my head. I'm talking about what I create in my head, and I'm making decisions based on that. Now, I'm going to illustrate it. See, right there, right. See, I'm going to illustrate. So here we go. So this is how we can think about it. In our world, think of two ends of a wave. And I think this is how I think we go through life on a day-to-day basis. And this is this very simple illustration, so bear with me. I think that everything that exists, first of all, exists in the realm of possibility. It's vapor. It only exists within my mind or your mind. It's one of numerous choices that could be made. You know, as you and I interact right now, you're thinking, how do I think about this? As you and I go to the grocery store, we're interacting, and there's numerous ways going around in my head, numerous possibilities of how I respond in any given situation. That's why they're possibilities. They yet do not exist in reality, or what I'm going to call substance, the material world. They're vapor, and there are many possibilities. So there's the first piece. That's one end of the wave. And I'll explain that in just a minute. The other point is substance, and that is when the possibility moves into the real world. It's when I say a derogatory statement because I'm motivated by these things in my head, and I really regret that I did that. It's now out into the real world. It's in now. I can always go back and ask for forgiveness. That's why the beauty of Jesus is so wonderful. But it is now in the real world. It's when a decision has been made, and the way it moves from possibility to substance is either my words or my actions. That's what Jesus is talking about, his words or his actions. I choose something in my head, and then I bring it into substance through my words, either a comment, positive or negative, or some sort of action. That's what makes it substance. I have a triangle because it's now a solid unit. It's now in the material realm. And I think you and I could think about going through daily life like this idea of possibility to substance, possibility to substance, possibility to substance. So now we get back to the text. He says, they hated me without a cause. What did he mean by that? Let's use our illustration. To hate without a cause is to do so based on what I create in my head, possibility, rather than substance. I make a decision based on what I create in my head. It's only a possibility. No one can blame me for thinking, yeah, have you guys, like, for me, after 6 o'clock at night, I will tend at times go into self-talk and all kinds of fearful, derogatory kind of thinking that's destructive. And I have learned, because of fatigue, back off. Don't go there. Address this in the morning. I don't know if you guys think like that or like that at all, but it's not a time to make a decision and move it into substance. I need to back that off and wait and reflect when I'm fresh in the morning. These people are hating without a cause, meaning their hate is based on the possibilities that they've created in their own heads, and they have made it into substance. Thus, there is no basis. If their hate was based on substance, something that really did happen in reality, that would be a different conversation. But that is not the case. They hated me without substance, is how we could say it. They hated me without a cause. And it just so happens that this is happening every single day all around us. What we extrapolate in our heads is monumental. How we come up with these harebrained ideas. And it's just part of being human now, as it was part of what we see in the text before us. So, table time. Jesus continues his teaching in regard to why hate exists. This is why hate exists, because of the stuff we create in our heads, to prepare his disciples for what is coming to them. People hate because they don't understand. And they don't understand because they are unable to force fit whatever the proposed is into their own thinking. That is the problem. And so, a possibility among many possibilities, when they're in the realm of idea, is chosen. A possibility that's based on my own unhealthy way of processing is chosen, and it only exists in my head. It's like vapor, but I'm moving something to substance based on what's in my head. There's no substance basis. It's just vapor. But once here's the downside. Once the choice is made by you or me, all other possibilities are nullified. And I don't know if any of you read anything on the quantum mechanics and that kind of thing. I do casual reading. I'm interested in it. And this, what I'm teaching here, can all be mathematically verified. They got names for all this. The collapse of the wave. Once a possibility is chosen, all other possibilities collapse and are nullified. And the one possibility then becomes the substance. It becomes what is brought into the world in a material sense. Thus, people hate without a cause, because people hate based on what's in their own heads, not on what has actually occurred. That is, in a general sense, not exclusively, but I would venture to say that much, and I would use the word much of hate is is brought into the brought into our world, the material world, because of false ideas that I create in my own head that don't exist. Now let's talk about this idea. Here's a bit of a disclaimer here, but it's a way to think about how we go through day-to-day decisions and interactions. And it's what I've done here is like the slow-mo camera, in the baseball game where they have the slow-mo. I love that, where they show the pitch coming in. And it's like the slow-mo version of how we make decisions. Of course, we're processing. I don't think we process numerous things. I think we process one at a time fast, but it gets slower as we age.
Mike, your bottom of your screen, at least on my screen, is being cut off. I can't see it.
It says, you might have to make your box bigger, Tatsi, because I've got the whole screen here. Can others see it? Yeah. So scroll, make your box bigger. I think that's why you're not seeing it. This is a slow-mo version of how we make decisions. What are your thoughts in regard to decision making in general? And fellas, what do we do with the hate? What do we do with the hate? So, wow, this is a loaded subject matter that is so prevalent to you and I and where we live and the environment that we find ourselves. We have possibly been on the receiving end of hate, and we have possibly been on the what do you call it? The receiving end and the giving end. Responsible end. What are your thoughts, fellas?
I don't want to get too whatever about this, but certainly when I was growing up during World War II, I was and people of my racial background,
Right. Yeah.
were hated mainly because people, they didn't really understand that people are not individuals based upon, and individual families are should be based upon how those people really are. Okay. So in our town, which was actually been categorized as a Midwestern redneck town, that's within distance of New York. I could see the Empire State Building from my building. Okay.
Huh.
You would think that would be a town in which we would not be accepted. But we were accepted in that town because of the background of mainly my mom's side of the extended family. They were all good students and, good citizens within that town. But once you got outside of that area, people didn't understand that. And they would just be prejudiced against us because we were Japanese. And they considered us as, assumed that we were unpatriotic, okay? And within that state of New Jersey, I don't know whether it's true or not, but the rumors we heard were that the Germans, who were not prejudiced, of German background, were not prejudiced against, but they were ones that were actually showing unpatriotic behavior. So anyway, that's
So
I just. Yeah, Mike, yeah.
I was rude, Tatsi. I cut you off prematurely. I'm sorry. I interrupted you.
No, I was done. I was done.
Well, what I was going to say, spoke too soon. That is a sad reality, and I'm sorry that you and other Asian Americans experienced that. But it is a perfect example of what we're talking about, that hating without a cause. The only cause, which I'm equating to substance, would be what has occurred in the real world. And there was nothing that existed from your demonstration of how you live life that would bring any level of cause to the reason of their hate. Japanese Americans were hated during the World War II, the concentration camps and so forth, because of what existed in the minds of the powers that be.
He just described denominationalism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all around us.
Well, it's interesting. I'm looking at, when you want to look at it from that angle, the possibilities become anecdotal. I mean, I'm thinking of way back when Reagan ran for president. Within there, they had the story of Willie Horton. Willie Horton was the black man who was released and went out and raped and killed somebody. Therefore, all criminals should never be let go, or they're all blacks are criminals. So people took that example and then made that a general substance, or if you fought the Japanese over there and you came back and you learned to realize where all these people look the same and they're trying to kill you, you carry that forward as what's going on. So it's not void of substance, it's void of logic. You see what I'm saying? There's examples for everything out there, and they're being thrown around every time someone speaks now. Well, here's an example of why we should do this. And so, no, here's an example of why we should do this. And the breakdown is the example doesn't. Policy by anecdotal is bad policy. Saying this one person does it, we'll make a policy to blanket everybody with it. So that's where, to me, policy moves in the substance, is when you generalize a single event and make it the substance of who people are.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Now, Carl, you've patiently had your hands up, and then I know, Vince, you want to say something, but let's let Carl go first, because go ahead, Carl.
Can you hear me okay here?
Well, you've got two things going at once, and so I think we can live with it. Go ahead. We'd love to hear your comment.
Yeah, you were asking how can we deal with hate, and I think the Holy Spirit shows us when we're hating someone. He tells us, or we recognize, we think, gosh, I really don't care for that person. We have a tendency to frame it in that mode. Yeah. We don't like to say, I really hate that person. I find myself saying, I really don't care for that person. And then I'll defend my position by giving a reason. But I think as we recognize that happening, I'm sorry about the background noise.
Appreciate your thoughts.
Then we have to deal with it. And I think we can actively deal with that by saying, Lord, help me to love that one like Christ would love. Forgive me for hating them because of whatever, your skin color or something they're doing, or because they're, and this is kind of a big one for me, because they're homosexual, and flaunting their homosexuality, and they make no bones about where they are, And so that's kind of where I'm at. And I have to take and just pray or think, Lord, forgive me for not liking, say they're not liking that person because they're homosexual. The reality is I'm hating them. And if we are followers of Christ and following him, he instructs us to love them. And boy, that's a that's a hard one to overcome. But and I'll have to admit, I don't think I do it very often in seeing someone that I hate.
Carl, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You're expressing in that example what is in every person in this call. We've all experienced. As a young man, Carl, I played those negative scenarios through in the name of righteousness. And that is so abhorrent to
Yeah.
who the person of Jesus is. I love what you said, Carl, just that you're now at a stage in your journey where you can catch yourself and say, Lord, this is not of you. Forgive me. How can give me the mind of Christ here? Let me lean in. Yes, I think that's exactly what we're talking about. Thank you, Carl.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, Bill, go ahead, Bill. Well, Vince,
Not to muddy the water, but I look at that possibility thing. I start. What comes to my mind is bias confirmation.
yeah,
You have a thought, and then you're going to look for people or things that reinforce that you're right.
yeah,
And that's going to create substance for you. And I mean, like Carl said, and I think for a lot of these situations where you're dealing with people, whether they're Islamic or gay or whatever, one of the things that helps collapse your thinking is when you have a relationship with one of them. They're your nephew, or they're your friend, or your uncle, or somebody you know, and you go like, wait a minute, I know that person, and he's not like that.
yeah.
And that begins to crack open that problem.
I thank you. And I want to hear what Vince has to say, Vince, but Bill, you used the word muddied. I actually think it's a word of clarity to how hard we as people look for confirmation of my predetermined grid of thinking. I have a way of thinking and I got to force fit. I got to find a peg that's going to go into that hole.
Yeah.
Because that hole can't change. And therein is the problem. Vince, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was thinking along the lines of what Carl was sharing and Bill just did about bias confirmation. And one of the things that I find myself doing to try to not hate people, and I honestly don't think I do hate people. You know, I disagree with a lot of people.
Yeah.
I disagree with virtually everybody except for me. And so it's, but when I think about hating, and if I get to myself and say, well, why do you hate that guy, Vince? The inner voice, which I'm going to guess is Holy Spirit, maybe, it's like, well, you don't hate him, do you? Really? I mean, do you really hate him? No. Well, why do you say you hate him? Well, because the crowd I'm running with hates him. And if I want to be part of that crowd, I have to sort of parrot what they're saying.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I won't be in that crowd.
Yeah.
And sometimes, unfortunately, the crowd is the Bible. I get in my mind that I'm on God's side. I read something in the Bible that I think I understand that supports my view. And I think that my hatred towards this group or person is justified because God hates them. Who am I to say I can't hate him? If he does, certainly I need to.
Right. Yeah.
never occurs to me that maybe I'm misunderstanding the Bible. Maybe when God says hate, there's a cultural, grammatical difference from what I'm thinking hate means. You know, God hates Esau. I mean, he really hate people. I mean, God's spirit, John 4:24, God doesn't hate anybody. But he, he expresses himself in a way that we can relate to, and we attach that to, I hate that guy. And then we walk around, I do walk around, my chest puffed out and saying, I'm illustrating the virtues of God, because God hated people and I hate people, so I must be godlike. It's really insane.
Yeah, it really is. And
When you talked about it, took me a while to understand what you were saying, Mike, about vapor and concretion and all. But once it hit what you were saying,
oh, good.
once it clicked,
Yeah.
I go, what an eloquent way to say it. That was exactly what's going on.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a vapor until you bring it out into the open.
Yeah.
Then it becomes concrete.
Yeah.
And then it becomes acted upon. And then it becomes hate that you can touch. It's craziness.
Yeah.
And we're living in the world right now. I guess we always have, as long as that been Cain, Cain hated Abel. I mean, there were 4 people on the planet, 2 of them hated each other. So it doesn't take a group, but takes a sense of loss.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Vince, for your words. I know you're not Steve, but Tatsi, yeah, you got your hand raised. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, I have to thank you. Today's lesson actually told me a lot about myself. And I realized that, I've talked a lot about my racial inferiority complex and about how my brother calls me a banana, white on the inside and yellow on the outside kind of a thing. So what I realized is that it was actually myself self-hating, during that whole time. I hated who I was. And I tried to become something else through whatever, my behavior, actions, or thoughts, or whatever kind of thing. So anyway, thank you, Mike. You actually taught me a lot about myself.
Wow. Well, thank you for your words, Tatsi. Yeah.
Mhm.
Other thoughts? Yeah, John, go ahead, John.
Yeah, so did Jesus ever hate?
That's a great question. What do some of you say?
I don't remember reading anything to that extent. I remember him getting mad at people and usually
Yeah,
standing up
during
against
the
powers.
money lenders, did he hate them, or was he just doing righteous anger? I don't know.
And
What do
did
you
he
think, John?
what did he suggest that we do with hate?
My mind was grappling this during my preparation. Is hate real? Is hate something, hate on substance, valid? Can we hate something if it's based on substance? Not, he's talking about hate basing on possibility, on vapor. But can we hate something? I would say, in a very general sense, I hate what was done to the Jews during World War II. As I'm becoming more aware, I am hating what has happened to our Asian Americans. It does create a burning inside of me that I could equate as hate. I don't deny that. But the tricky thing is identifying what is that feeling based on. Is it based on what I'm self-manufacturing? Or is it based on on true substance, material substance that has occurred? So that, how would you answer, John?
Well, I think Jesus, talks about our enemies and, we're to love them and, and pray for them and pray for people that persecute us. So I think he had a whole different, instead of an eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth thing, he said, nah, the fix for this is love, is forgiveness, is and maybe right thinking, seeing the bigger picture. But I don't know if scripture talks about hating like evil. Does it?
It's certainly something we got to be careful of. I don't want to cut you off, John. Do you have more thoughts? Because Tatsi wants to say something.
I was just gonna say that for me, Jesus did some things, but it was more out of a tough love types of concept rather than a hate types of concept. So there's a difference between doing things, out of a tough love type of concept, especially in terms of drug addiction and those types of things,
Yeah.
as opposed to hate.
I can tell through our discussions, we're entering that very cautiously and wisely, and I think that's true. Hate's a strong word. Bill, and then Dave's got something. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah.
I yield to Dave.
I keep thinking that part of what we're called to do, which is I think what the Lord was doing, for example, at the money tables in the temple and so forth, was righteous indignation. When you're convinced in your spirit of the quote unquote the evil or it's a stumble word, the wrongness of something that's going on, your reaction shouldn't be in human hate, but it should be founded on the basis of the Lord would be righteously indignant that this is going on. So we find ourselves in situations, Johnny Squares, who some of you used to use this phrase, and he says sometimes we find ourselves in situations where somebody needs God with skin on. We're suddenly faced with a situation where face to face, we're the only ones that can react to something in the moment at the time. And it's a real challenge to be able to be, I'm going to phrase it again and again, it's something we have to work out day by day, but it's a challenge to be righteously indignant to something and not be hateful. And there is a difference. I don't know how to describe it any better than that, but we're not called to be hateful, but we are called to be indignant at the things that are not of God that happen.
Yeah.
He's called us and challenged us to be that. We're to be salt and light and leaven. We're not to be a bunny rabbit that lays down in front of a steamroller.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Dave, for your comments. Yeah. And Bill, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I want to go back to the text here and what Jesus said. He said to them, if they hate me, it's because they hate the Father. Now, in all of his interactions with these people, the challenge was, I'm from the Father, and they would say, no, you're not. We know the Father, you're not from the Father. Those dialogues happen throughout Scripture, and they argue over who's representing the Father. And it's sort of, in a sense, Jesus has to kind of even cross the Torah at times with his, you have heard it said, but I say stories. And so the battle here, I think, is with his disciples, who's in league with the Father here? Those people are me. And if I'm in league with the Father, then they're wrong. And you got to understand, if they start persecuting me, you're on the right side of the equation. And of course, they thought, well, we're in league with the Father, and you're screwing it all up. We need to crucify you. I mean, that kind of goes back to the text. So I think Jesus was really laying out the new world he was creating, because it wasn't always in line with the Torah. And I'll let go to John.
No, I was just going to say that is a great way to pull this together. Today, we have our little world, and whether it be politics or even denominations that they've said, but that would be the lens to see it through. Does, like when Martin Luther King showed up doing the nonviolent thing with the civil rights, would we say he fits? What lens would we have seen him through? And today in the world that we live in, right, with our faith and belief system that we accept, what lens do we see it through? That lens, or do we see everybody outside of our little lens, in light of this God and Father of what's really real? Do we live in our... But anyway, I didn't do a very good job with that. But Bill, I liked how you brought that back. I think it's the world that we live in. Sterling. Yeah.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, so what has struck me about this is just how, again, Jesus has just come into Jerusalem and was lauded as, the king. Now he's so quickly now trying to explain to the disciples the future. And it's, again, to kind of bring it down to present, how quickly, in the past, what ends up happening is how quickly, things change for Jesus and how everyone turns against him. And it is, in just from king to being hated in such a short amount of time. And as Mike talked about the quantum mechanics, kind of that group think and the wave and all of those things. I mean, can you imagine? And I looked it up. Jerusalem was about 250,000 people at the time. And during Passover, it swelled to 2.5 million, mostly, because the Hebrews are coming in for Passover. And so he had his people there. It wasn't some multicultural group that would have had reasons for conflict, but they turned on him. And I do worry for where we are now and into the future, just with the technology and social media. It's being used in other countries to turn, for political reasons and to create an abundance of hate. And I really do worry for our future, just in how, you can see how quickly it happened back then with no technology.
Yeah.
What waves are going to be created in our future? And it is I think it's a bit frightening. And I also think of Bonhoeffer and Hitler and how he stood up. Who's going to stand up? It's got to be people of strong faith. I think is the only chance we have to stand up against hate that almost is inevitable. I mean, I hate to be pessimistic, but it's a tough world out there right now with a lot of hatred.
As a history.
It's a big history. Yeah.
Well, guys, thank you, all of you, for your comments. So good. Carl, your words of wisdom today was so good, and many of your comments, guys, thank you.
Oh.
The question that going back to John's great question, Jesus says, hating without a cause. Does that mean that there is a hate with a cause? I really go cautiously on that one, because I know I'm prone to error. I think hate is something to stay away from. Dave, you tried to bring those ideas together. I think we're all on the same page, and at this stage of life, we'll continue next week. Today is April 10th, and I'll be here next week, so I'll look forward to seeing you guys. And Have a good week. Thanks for all your comments. Bye for now.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Mike.